Hello and welcome to the Colts Cover-2 Podcast. I am Joel A. Erickson. I'm joined as always by Nate Atkins. Nate, it is game week. The Colts are playing a real football game with real stakes and real playbooks and everything else that goes into the regular season that we did not see in the preseason. Indianapolis opens where the 2023 season ended at home at Lucas Oil against the Houston Texans.
Yeah, we're here. We're finally here. It's been 17 days since the last time they took the field for what they called a game, but it didn't really feel like a game when they were playing the Bengals, even though the hot takes fit the moment as if it was a game. And so it's been a long build up to now, and I think it's just like it's gonna hit us on Sunday. Everyone, just the fact that this is real and it's back, and we can get the beginning of real answers and learn new problems or new areas of upside in this team. And we're going to be sitting here trying to put it into perspective and also preach patience, but it's also like, I get it. It's going to be like a top that just blows, because it's been so much build up to week one of every NFL season, specifically this team back on the field against this team that they fell, a fourth down play short of to end the season last year. It's literally the vision that's sat in these players' minds and a lot of fans' minds ever since that moment. And then the build up to seeing Anthony Richardson back out there for the first time in almost a whole calendar year. And we've only gotten glimpses of him in two preseason games since then, where they were very intentionally running an offense that's nothing like what we're going to see. So just the intrigue of watching them with a year two Anthony Richardson implement an offense that's designed around his skill set, but also is going to not just protect him the way that those early games did last year, but accentuate the best parts of him and be explosive and be aggressive. There's so much we're going to learn from that, and also so much we're only going to be teased by, because it's going to be sort of a 17-game roller coaster for this team, especially for a quarterback who's only started 17 games since high school. So it's going to be a very interesting mix of, like, we're going to get some real football and real answers, but also this is the nature of this sport, and why everyone loves it so much is there's the takes and overreactions are going to be through the roof too. And I guess that in some ways that's part of the fun too.
Which matchup in this game are you looking forward to seeing most?
I'd say probably I'm looking at Leatu Latu against Laramie Tunsil. I think it's pretty fun. So it's a Pro Bowl left tackle. The Texans gets to go up against the first defender taken in the draft, who so far has looked every bit the part, but of course, not a lot of moments against a player like Laramie Tunsil. Maybe just a few snaps in there against Garrett Bowles, who's an All-Pro of the Broncos, but certainly nothing where a team's game planning to help deal with him. So he looks like a real player so far. I'm really curious to see how he brings that to this game. Not only that matchup and how, whether or not he takes advantage of Laramie Tunsil, but he is really what they're pinning a lot of the upside of this whole defense on, where they didn't really change very much of anything around him. It's pretty much the exact same defense as last year, just about in every single spot, except one Leo edge rusher spot is going now to, a guy they thought was the best pass rusher in the draft. And he's got to be that answer. I just think in this game, the game's going to come down to what last year's did too, which is what is going to overwhelm the other one more. Is it going to be the Colts pass rush overwhelming the Texans offensive line like they did the first matchup and won? Or is it going to be the Texans and CJ Stroud overwhelming the Colts secondary in winning the way they did in the second matchup that ended the season? Whichever one of those wins out, whether it's the CJ and the receivers are more dominant or the Colts pass rush is more dominant, that's going to, I think, answer for us who wins this game. And so a small but key part of that is Leatu Latu in his first career game going up against a Pro Bowl left tackle.
Yeah, I'm really curious. Usually when we do like the categories on this podcast after the game, we try to pick different ones. But I really think that's the matchup for me. It's the whole matchup. Is what does Latu look like when he goes against the Tunsil? But also, what do they do with Latu? He's very interesting to me. Because they said, if you go back to draft night, and I know Nate remembers this, I think most Colts fans remember this too. From the start, they were talking about how he can rush from all over the formation, and that it gave them options that they didn't have before in terms of where he could rush from, what they could do. I know in training camp, we saw him line up in the inside some in a standing up rush. I saw him on the against the right tackle, so left defensive end versus right tackle at times. For the most part, he's lined up on that blind side, but I'm curious to see what they do to get him moved around, to get him some matchups maybe away from Tunsil and give CJ Stroud some other looks. Like, could we get a DeForest Buckner and Latu both rushing the A gap, which is, for those of you who don't know, that's between the center and the guard. Can we get them moved out to the other side? I think they're going to rush them together a lot and just kind of overwhelm one side of the defensive line. I'm just curious to see what they do to kind of give him some rushes away from Tunsil. And then obviously what happens when they go at Tunsil. You made this point already, but the Texans' offensive line, at least from what I can tell, is pretty shaky outside of him. I poked around on, this is an imperfect way to do it when you don't have data yet, but I was poking around on some Texans like blogs and stories and stuff, and it does sound like outside of Tunsil, those other four spots are all pretty shaky.
Yeah, it's an interesting offense in that way. I've got a couple friends who cover the Texans, so I hear about it a lot. Apparently, they're so much better at pass protection than run blocking. It's not usually how it goes. It's not always how it goes. Sometimes it's like an offensive line is, if they're good at both. But sometimes it's different skill sets. Also, so the pass pro is much more of an individual talent add-up type thing than how they have to play together in the run game. So the way it's gone on is they play better in pass protection, but the run blocking has been a big problem. They brought Joe Mixon in from the Bengals. That looks like a big move on paper, but I don't know that he's really been a difference maker with the Bengals. And it just sounds like they're going to lean heavily into the pass this year. The more I get this, I feel like that's probably why they went out and got Stephon Diggs, when at the time it felt like, you're bringing Tank Dell back already. You've got Nico Collins. They had good receivers. They ended up cutting like Noah Brown. It was like, what? It did not feel at all like a position they had to go and get, unless this was a team that wanted to move away from what they did a lot last year, which was 2 tight ends or playing with a fullback, to playing in more 11 personnel and just leaning into that pass. And that's what I think they're going to do a lot more. They have their offensive style with Bobby Slowick is that Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay wide zone, which doesn't live in, it's often a 2 tight end type of thing, but I think they're going to live more in 11 personnel because they just realized the whole makeup of their offense is all built for the pass. Between the offensive linemen are more comfortable that way. Their quarterback is a drop back passer who can, create enough with his legs to scramble and throw, but is not a designed runner. And then all their skill talent are at those 3 wide receiver spots. And then even their top tight end, Dalton Schultz, is a pretty good receiving tight end on top of that. So I think especially when they take that matchup into this week, where the strength of the Colts defense is that pass rush up front and the run defense with Grover Stewart and Zaire Franklin up the middle, and just in understanding this team, and these teams I feel like are starting to know each other well because they played each other twice last year. The Colts didn't really change anything about who they are. I just really think that they're going to lean into that all the way, and we could just see a wild pass run split on Sunday, or at least we should, because I remember there was moments last year where we wondered, like, why are they running as much as they are when the Colts had such secondary issues. And it kind of felt like once the Texans woke up to that, realized that, they started to get some explosive plays, and CJ Stroud averaged like 11 yards an attempt in that second game against the Colts. That was without Julian Blackmon, so it's not entirely the same thing. But I just think they're going to lean into that and stress how many guys in this passing game can the Colts cover, and how quickly can they cover, and see how that goes.
Yeah, just to underscore your point, Houston Texans last year ranked 7th in the league in passing offense, both in yards per play and yards in general. Rushing-wise, 29th in the league in yards per carry at 3.7 and tied for 22nd in yards at 96.9, which generally tells you that they were feeding the ball to the running backs probably more than they should have based on their efficiency. And they've made a change. Joe Mixon is the running back now. Was it Singletary last year?
Yeah, they started with Dameon Pierce. That didn't really work, so they settled on Devin Singletary, and now it's Joe Mixon.
I don't think either of us are super high. I know Mixon has been a fairly consistent fantasy play for people because of the volume he was guaranteed to get in Cincinnati, but I don't think either you or I are super feels if we were the Colts defensive coordinator, if we were Gus Bradley, I don't think we'd feel super threatened by Mixon.
No, not especially not with, again, the makeup of this team. They're going to have DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart in the middle. Now, the one thing that is interesting, I don't know how much Raekwon Davis is going to play now that he hasn't gotten a lot of work. So if they go to, they don't have a backup nose tackle there. So it could become a matchup thing in certain moments. But for the most part, if they look out on this line and it's those two in the middle, Kwity Paye on one end, often on run type downs, Tyquan Lewis, or maybe Dayo Odeyingbo at the other end. Then you look back and there's Zaire Franklin. Like the matchup is not at all in their favor. The explosiveness, I just don't think there's any explosiveness to Joe Mixon's game behind this kind of setting where you don't really have the quarterback run threat. All the explosiveness, the upside, and even frankly just the efficiency and what you can bank on is going to be in that passing game. And they've got 3 big-time receivers. Remember the last time – it's weird, the last time these teams played, the Colts were banged up in the secondary because they didn't have Julian Blackmon, who we've learned is so critical to what they do. But the Texans also only really had Nico Collins at receiver, and he went crazy, but they didn't have Tank Dell, and obviously they didn't have Stephon Diggs yet. So it's sort of like there are some moving pieces from that last matchup, but it still looks like one that is very lopsided in that the Colts look like they could overwhelm in the against the run and should have a good chance in the pass rush. The Texans, though, I think they're going to go right at the secondary right out of the gates and see how the Colts handle it.
So I want to stick on this secondary conversation, the wide receivers conversation we're having, but just a real quick aside. The Colts released their depth chart. They had Taven Bryan over Raekwon Davis at nose tackle. I understand that Raekwon Davis didn't have a full training camp. But if they don't play Raekwon Davis over Taven Bryan as a backup nose tackle on Sunday, they have explaining to do. And I'm going to bring this home with a statistic that I think is important here. 2 weeks ago, we're taping this on Wednesday, so almost exactly 2 weeks ago, Raekwon Davis played 18 snaps against the Cincinnati Bengals in a preseason game. He's had 2 full weeks since then. Unless he's had a setback, like, to me, it's got to be Raekwon Davis. That's just a real quick aside. We saw what Taven Bryan does against the run as a nose tackle. He's not a nose tackle. Like, if Raekwon Davis is inactive, we're gonna have to ask the question about it to somebody going forward. This is like what's going on? We thought he was back, right?
Yeah, and he said, he's ready for a full workload. Now, some of that players don't like to ever admit that they're not like 100%. So I didn't necessarily take that to mean for sure, no doubt he's out there, let's roll. But yeah, it's been enough time to at least, you'd think be a backup role. It's not like the backup nose tackle, barring injury, should be that many snaps.
18 is about right. 18 is about right for what he might play. I mean, that actually might be a little high for what I would think he might play in a game.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I will say when he was in against the Bengals, it felt like the Bengals were mostly running away from him, but at the same time, they were running at will. Like it wasn't. I don't know. It's hard to read into preseasons. Why we say all the time it's not that critical. But yeah, I just have a feeling we talk about these teams know each other well. Is that if Taven Bryan is at nose tackle, that would be the situation where the Texans will run on the Colts.
Let's get back to the receivers. This is backup defensive tackle talk is my fault and probably gone on too long. But let's get back to these receivers. So it's Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell. I believe is Robert Woods still there as a backup?
That I'm not sure. Yeah, he is still there. John Mechie's still there. They moved on from Noah Brown.
So this is a very deep wide receiving core, and this is where we talked about this so much during I feel like this podcast was almost a secondary podcast. We almost had to switch from cover 2 to the secondary podcast. The only reason we stuck with it was because cover 2 is about the secondary anyway. But in terms of tests early in the season, just by sheer talent of receiving cores, this is a young Colt secondary. Nick Cross is going to start. I know you got something coming on Nick Cross, but you look at these first 3 games for sure. You go the Texans with the guys we just said. You go Green Bay, who basically has 6 starting caliber receivers that they kind of mix and match whenever they want to mix and match them. And then you get the Bears, who have DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Roma Dunze. We're going to find out really fast if this secondary can hold its own against good receivers. Now, I think the Colts, just like you said earlier, the Colts are pretty much counting on the pass rush to help them out a considerable amount. But we're still going to find out some stuff. Just based on last year and what you said earlier about the defense being the same, Texans are going to get this ball out of their hands quick. They just are.
Oh, yeah. I think you're going to see one of the quickest releases. And the only time that they won't do that is when they do go in probably a 2 tight end look and they go max protection. They were doing that in that last game. But I still think that was more about the fact that they only had 1 wide receiver that they trusted. So they only set 2 out in the pattern. But the Colts couldn't handle Nico Collins without Julian Blackmon. Now that Julian Blackmon's back, and I think he's going to mostly play strong safety and be sort of that help player in coverage right off the bat. I think the Texans will live in 11 personnel, which means the ball's got to come out fast, or it could be trouble for CJ. But that's going to be that's his game. I mean, that can be his game if he wants it to be his game. And then those other 2 that you mentioned, Jordan Love and Caleb Williams, are kind of an opposite, not totally opposite, but different in the sense that they've got a little bit more mobility to them. Certainly Caleb Williams, where he is a young player and young players hold the ball longer anyway. His style is going to be to hold the ball longer, but he has the ability to kind of move and get away from some guys in order to, force the Colts in coverage to hold up longer. So we're going to get tons of answers in the first 3 weeks. You never want to read just into one game, and that's what a lot of people are going to do. It'll be an interesting way to launch into talking points. But by 3 weeks into this, I think we're going to have a pretty good feel for whether or not the Colts secondary is able to hold up, whether or not this pass rush is dominant enough to overcome it and not make us think that much about it, and whether or not they can force teams to run the ball enough to be this sort of balanced defense where they do profile really well against the run until they have an injury. And, but can they get teams to even care about that? I remember a couple of years ago, it felt like every single short yardage play, teams would run up the middle on the Colts. And we were sitting there in the press box do you guys scout this team? They've got DeForest Buckner, Grover Stewart, Zaire Franklin, Ronnie McLeod. You're just running into a brick wall. And it seemed like last year teams started to, certainly second half of the year, realized, hey, let's go with the secondary. Let's not do that. So the advantage of the Colts that they'll talk about is, when they run it back and they have every starter back, is they build some defensive continuity. They know who they are. They play better together. But the flip side of that is that teams know exactly what they are too. And so I have no doubt that these teams early in the year are going to do a mix of either throw quick, like CJ will on Sunday, or extend the play and force you to cover, stick with receivers kind of at the top of their routes is what I think the Bears are going to do. And we're going to learn a lot in these 3 weeks, because while those are 3 very tough tests out of the gates, there's still one of those is a rookie quarterback. One of those in Jordan Love, we're going to learn just how high end he is. But the whole schedule is going to have some tough tests where they're going to get C.J. Stroud a second time. They're going to get Trevor Lawrence twice, and he gets the ball out of his hands as fast as anybody. They're going to get Josh Allen, who's the master of extending plays and throwing. They're going to get Aaron Rodgers and Tua Tagovailoa, and a lot of tests here that'll be challenging and be interesting. So the other thing too is like how long can the secondary hold up just in its numbers is what I'm curious to see. I mean, my hope every year is that we have 0 injuries. That has never happened yet. I'm going to keep hoping that every year. I don't think I'm going to get that though. So this is a secondary where that's a concern because the 3 stalwarts, theoretical stalwarts, Kenny Moore, Julian Blackmon, and Juju Brents, they combined for 38 missed games. And then you have Dallas Flowers coming off the Achilles injury and coming off last week's hamstring injury. Now he is back at practice, so that's good. But they only kept 5 cornerbacks on the roster. I guess it turns out Sam Womack has played on the outside. He likes playing press. He's still not really built the way that Gus Bradley's outside cornerbacks play. And that just wasn't where he had his good plays with the 49ers. He's more of a special teams focus. So it's just hard to see, if they start having some injuries in the early part of the season, what they're going to do. Again, when they had one injury last year against the Texans, that kind of created this communication unraveling that led to, CJ Stroud to have one of his best games and end up winning the division. So it's one thing to talk about where this team is right now. And to their credit, luckily, they have pretty good health on defense. There's other parts of this team where health is a little concerning, and I'm sure we'll get to it. But at least on defense, feels like everyone's there. Feels like everyone's practicing. Outside of obviously Samson Ebekom's just done for the year, but everyone that we've been looking at and counting on and hoping to see for the past few weeks is out there. But there's going to be attrition, and it's going to test a lot of the plan that this organization put out there about do they have enough to handle what's going to be 17 games of attrition to some level. And so week 1 will be just the tip of that iceberg, I think.
Yeah, let's move into the offensive side of the ball. The big injury to watch there is Josh Downs. So Josh Downs, high ankle sprain. We're getting close to a month out. It'll be a month by the time the game's played. All Shane Steichen has said so far is he's really progressing, and we'll see. He did not practice on Wednesday. I noticed him working with a trainer, and there was one point where he was like jogging back and forth with the trainer, and he stopped and then started jogging again. I did never see him run. Did you see him run full out?
No, not full out.
You hate to make predictions about this, but you wonder, like, it just feels like it seems like if he's going to play, number one, it seems like he's probably not going to play, and number two, it seems like if he is, he'd probably be limited in some form or fashion. I don't think it just doesn't seem like I almost would think that as long as he's been out, that he almost needed to be on the field today to really have a shot at playing a full role. Correct?
Yeah, and they had a walkthrough on Monday as well. That's like that would have been the time to drop him in on the walkthrough to get just acclimated to the playbook, maybe do some conditioning, and then full practice Wednesday. Wednesday is the install day. So it's like when they put a game plan in, that's why they have them go out there and do that. And he's not there for it. Now, that doesn't mean he can't like mentally step in and know what to do in a role that he had last year in the same playbook. But it is a ramp up that would have to be dramatically quick after missing just about a full month of all activities here. So the other thing beyond like whether he can physically pull it off is should he, like they've got 17 games to keep him ready for. And this is a player whose entire game is built on change of direction, plant out of that ankle. That's what made him look so great in the training camp practices before that was his cuts were just so crisp and no wasted movement and was such a hard cover for for opponents. And if that's not working the same way, Josh Downs isn't the same player. He's one of the smallest players on the roster. He's the outlier, and this team goes for in wide receiver because he makes up for it with high football IQ, an elite change of direction, great hands. But all of that's kind of negated if he can't separate. He's not going to be a guy who wins just with physicality in that way. And then you don't want to get into a spot like 2 years ago. There's not many things you want to do that are like the Colts did 2 years ago. And one of those things was when they just kept pushing through on Jonathan Taylor, trying to have him play through the high ankle sprain, where he was a player too whose explosiveness was such a huge part of his game, that jump cut and change of direction, and he lost it and just was never the same all year. And so it's kind of like, what are you risking to put him out there one game when they don't have a bye week until December? And I think just the fact that last year showed them what this is like with Josh Downs, where they had to manage a knee injury for a while, but then it re-aggravated at midseason. They had the late bye week, but he played the second half, not the same, not as explosive, not as good out of cuts because that knee wasn't working the right way. And his production fell quite a bit off in the second half compared to the first half. So they want the best version of Josh. And so I just will be surprised given how much they look at. That's generally how they treat players, unless they're just that a couple exception players just play through everything. But for the most part, they want the best version of them. And so I'll be surprised if we see him.
Yeah, just to remind people, because it's been a couple of years with Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor suffered the sprained ankle early. He missed 2 games, came back for 2 or 3, missed another game, and then was back for 3 games at a full workload. And then, 4 games. He was back for 4 games at a full workload. Sorry, I was looking at it right now. So he was down 2, back at about a half workload for 2, down 1, back for 4 at full workloads. Looks like he averaged about 58-ish snaps a game. And then on the second play of the Minnesota game, he gets hurt and misses the rest of the season. So, that's a really good indicator of how difficult high ankle sprains are if you don't let them heal all the way. And with so much season going on, I know he's been out for 4 weeks, but what's the point? What's the point of rushing it?
Yeah, it's a big game in the sense that it is the team that they're chasing, the AFC South, but you need all the games to end up mattering. I think there's less of a chance of them winning without him, but I think there's less of a chance of them going to playoffs if he has to play this season on a compromised ankle and especially when this season is also about developing a lot of the rhythm and accuracy and comfort of Anthony Richardson as a passer. And I think Josh Downs is a huge part of that. In fact, I've made that point of why I think a lot of people are latching on to how kind of choppy the Colts passing game has looked for the past couple weeks. I think they've lost that bankable short depth of target player that is Josh Downs, who has the best chemistry with Anthony Richardson since they're in the same draft class. And Anthony hasn't played with A.D. Mitchell before, and he's barely thrown many targets in games to Alec Pierce. Josh Downs, even though it's a limited sample with him, was the closest thing to kind of his type of player outside of obviously Michael Pittman Jr., but Pittman's one guy and Josh Downs was a second guy. And, so they need that. They need that in the long run to really get Anthony in more of a rhythm passer and good mechanics and consistent in that way to then tap into that overall upside of taking those shots, create those explosive plays. So they need him too badly to risk it this week.
Yeah. So A.D. Mitchell, I'm writing a story on this, but that should be up before this podcast. Well, it depends. Could be because usually now Clark gets these up pretty fast. So it might be done before you see this story, but A.D. Mitchell's never played the slot before. Never played it in college. Not really that surprising. He's built like an outside receiver, but he's never played it in college. And he was talking to me today a little bit about just how it's very different. It's very different. The outside is generally one-on-one. Sometimes there's a safety over the top. on the interior of the field, he said there's 3, sometimes 4 guys you have to be aware of at all times, and it's just a very different setting. But he is also probably their best option. I don't think Anthony Gould is, despite being built like a traditional slot, that's not what we saw from him in training camp. I think you could see some stuff with him, some jet sweep, funky stuff with him. And then outside of that, everybody else that's on the roster is an outside receiver, unless you want to do the big slot thing with Michael Pittman Jr., which I am not opposed to. Mm-hmm. I would be interested in seeing it. You'd have to look at the first one that comes to mind is Marcus Colston as a big slot, but I would be interested in seeing Michael Pittman operate out of the slot some, even after Josh Downs gets back. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, Shane's creative enough at hunting out mismatches that it wouldn't surprise me if we see some of that. But yeah, it's different. I think there's been so much AD Mitchell hype, and just how it gets when you have like a receiver who's super talented out of the draft. You haven't seen him. It's that mystery box thing, and he is very talented. But I think there was a little bit of like when he stepped in as a slot receiver, so many people got excited that, well, the solution's here. There's no drop off. We just move him in and just go and play. And like you mentioned, talking to AD Mitchell, he hasn't played it before. Like Josh Downs, while he's a young player, it was very different where he's basically been that same style of wide receiver his whole life, including at the highest of volume levels at North Carolina and last year for a very productive rookie season. And they're just totally different makeups of players, both their physical skill set, but also their readiness. Like Josh Downs fell to the third round because he's, 5'8" and 170 some pounds. And not a lot of teams wanted that, and it restricts him to the slot. But like his readiness is about as good as I've ever seen out of a young player, honestly. And AD Mitchell has all that athletic upside and has some great explosive plays in college, but he slipped to the second round for some different reasons, but they kind of circle back to that readiness and that, day one, year one trust level. And that is a big part of playing in the slot and playing a new position. They've been intrigued. I know they talked up, kind of how like eager he is to learn, and they think he's smart and he's picking it up. So that's encouraging, but there's still such a long way to go to catch up to what just the natural feel and consistency Josh Downs has doing it. And then the other thing that Josh Downs offers them that I just don't think any rookie is going to step in and do right now is that sort of pre-snap stuff, that kind of unspoken communication where he motions pre-snap that helps reveal to them whether the defense is in man or zone and helps dictate kind of where they want defenders to be on the field, with a receiver who can then run routes after quickly learning that information and change an option route to where he's either, he's settling in if he's going to face zone coverage, or he's cutting and exploiting a matchup in man. It's not going to be a consistent volume thing with AD Mitchell. It's just not built that way. It's still very nice to have him as a backup slot, because there's been other times this team has had no depth at receiver, and last year when it was a different situation, but Michael Pittman Jr. missed against the Falcons. They basically couldn't even operate as a passing game. They had nobody put out there, and they're in a much better spot overall to handle this than that. But it's still going to be different. They're still going to lean on the other pieces of this offense while Downs is out. They're going to lean more on that run game. They're going to lean more on probably Michael Pittman Jr. than they would with Downs is out there. Design maybe some things up for the tight ends in the RPO game that otherwise would go to Downs, and maybe some quarterback run. It's just going to be a little different. You hope that's why I think Shane Steichen's really good at adjusting for like one game at a time. If they had to miss this game, I think they're fine. And that's why they got to eventually get Josh Downs back out there to be that full-time guy that opens all that up, because I think he's one of the biggest keys season long to getting Anthony Richardson to develop as a short and intermediate range consistent passer, but he's also that guy who unlocks a lot of creative elements of Shane Steichen to exploit defenses with whatever they throw at him.
The Texans. So the Texans invested in their defensive line this offseason. They went and got Danielle Hunter. They signed Danico Autry. They have some uncertainty for them on that side of the ball because Danico Autry will not play in this game. He won't play in the first 6 games. He was suspended for PEDs. And Will Anderson has missed most of training camp with an ankle injury. Now, I don't know what the severity is. He was not listed on the injury report today, so that's a suggestion that he's probably going to play. But is he 100% Will Anderson?
The report out from the Houston Chronicle that he's going to play week 1.
Okay, but so he's going to play, but here's the question. Is he 100% Will Anderson? Is he less than that? I don't know. Yeah. Did the Chronicle say what his ankle injury was?
I've not looked that far into it yet.
all I've seen so far is ankle injury. I haven't seen like whether it was high or low or sprain or what. But so there's some uncertainty for them there on the defensive line. The other thing that I was thinking about is, with those edge guys that they have, how are those guys against the run? How's the rest of the defensive line against the run? They're kind of built to be pass rushers. So, just an interesting question to try to ponder is like, is this going to be the full Texans defense the way they thought it was going to be right off the bat?
Yeah, I just looked, and Will Anderson was not listed on the injury report at all today. So sounds like he's full physically all the way over that. But yeah, we'll see if he has to kind of get back into the flow if that lingers at all. So he's a big piece of this, though, obviously, with Danielle Hunter. I mean, trying to win on both edges of the pass rush. And yeah, it's going to be the Danielle Hunter aspect is interesting because that's the one swing we know that the Colts tried to take in the offseason in free agency. They wanted Danielle Hunter pretty bad. They came kind of close, but he's from Houston and he got a fully guaranteed deal. So he went to the Texans, and the Colts then their recourse was to draft Laiatu Latu, who looks really good, but it's Danielle Hunter is the player that is kind of the fully realized version of what they hope Latu builds into. Just last season, Danielle Hunter, 16 and a half sacks, and led the league in 23 tackles for loss. So he's a force out there, and he's, and Will Anderson, we kind of know his deal is one of the top picks in the draft. Obviously, we'll see how his ankle is, but last season, defensive rookie of the year, 7-sack player, 22 quarterback hits. So they're going to come after him. It's a matchup of two awesome pass rushes, and it is kind of interesting in that way is that they do have, like the Texans are kind of banking on that front covering up some things because they are slated to start 2 rookies in the secondary. So there's questions there. There's just they got some talent on the back end. They signed Azeez Al-Shaair from the Titans, who's a pretty good middle linebacker to help kind of run their defense. They've got Derek Stingley, we know, is a star, and Jimmy Ward is kind of fit D'Amico Ryan's defense for a long time. But there's some spots out here that are a little bit more of a mystery box. And Jonathan Taylor has run wild on the Texans every time he's played them, kind of regardless of who is running the defense or what. Now you're mixing that with Anthony Richardson, who ran wild on them in the first half of week 2 game last year to put that one away. This is the first time they've ever dealt with those two in the same backfield. And so they are like the rest of the NFL. I don't think they have any idea what's going to come here. And that's the most exciting thing for the Colts is that those 2 players are, at this moment, completely fresh, completely ready, built up, did not miss any time in the training camp, got a little bit of preseason action, have played together a little bit, enough to give Shane Steichen and Jim Bob Cooter ideas of what they want to deploy while having not shown any of it on film yet. That's what I'm most excited about in terms of like the best matchup, single player on player matchup in this is Laiatu versus Tunsil. But the actual single biggest intrigue to me is watching that backfield against the D'Amico Ryan's defense and just seeing Shane Steichen unleash what he's been thinking about building for the past 9 months in his version of a revenge game against the team that he fell just short against to try and reach the playoffs a year ago. So especially for that to open at home with the Lucas Oil crowd, we could see some really exciting fireworks, both sides of the ball, with two explosive young quarterbacks and offenses that should have a big-time schematic advantage against the defense that they're playing.
If you watch us on video, we are on YouTube, I believe. My youngest son Watley made an appearance in his "Here for the Milk" shirt from the shop from the shop Indy. If you don't, I think most of you probably listened to it, but and I was able to mute the mic. He was trying to talk into the mic, but I muted the thing.
That's why I was waving, but I was trying to it's multitasking here. Stay on the job and still give a wave.
The last injury we have to get to, there's some significant kicking uncertainty.
Yeah.
Matt Gay has a hernia that he underwent surgery to repair within the last week or so. They're not saying he's not going to kick. I don't know a ton about hernia surgery. I've never had it. Seems like it would be prohibitive to kicking. You're stretching your torso muscles and that stuff. That seems like it would be. I don't know. They've got Spencer Schrader here. Spencer Schrader did not know that was the really interesting piece of talking to Spencer Schrader today. He was not aware ahead of time when they waived him. It wasn't like we're waiving you, but we're bringing you back to the practice squad. He didn't know that, which I think they do tell some guys that, hey, as long as you make it through, we're bringing you back to the practice squad. The timeline is a little muddy. Matt Gay hurt himself sometime the weekend after the Cincinnati preseason game, and then he said that he tried to get through it for a couple days and then realized, hey, something's really wrong here. Pretty uncertain. If Matt Gay is somehow able to kick, I think kicking that quickly after surgery is probably a concern. And if he doesn't kick, this is a Spencer Schrader's never kicked in the NFL. So he'd be a rookie kicking. So that you hate to say this because Colts kickers in openers against Texans creates some recent pain. But some significant uncertainty at the kicking position heading into the opener.
Yeah. And it's, to me, a little similar to Josh Downs, except for the fact that Josh Downs is kind of at the edge of his recovery, or it should be somewhat close. Matt Gay, for all we know, it just happened, a week and a half ago or so. But it's similar in the sense that, it's one thing to talk about, do you play him in this game where you need points and you try to take down the AFC South team, but also how do you get him fresh for the rest of the games? And what's the balance between all of that? That's what I think is the conversation with Matt Gay is it's one thing is, can he get out there on either Thursday or Friday, practice and feel like he can give it a go? But is he going to be the Matt Gay that they signed him to be? Because I've got a story that'll come out in a little bit, not to tease all of it, but there are some explanations for why he struggled down the stretch last season. Something that he was dealing with last year where he was not himself for those final 8 games when he went 17 of 23 and he also missed an extra point. But it's difficult. This is very different though than a lot of other positions where where he you could just sub in an AD Mitchell. They don't have an AD Mitchell to play a kicker. Not to take away from Spencer Schrader, but he's not a Pro Bowler. He's not the highest paid kicker in NFL history. And yeah, it's something you don't want to have that lingering in. I'm just in the same spot with Josh Downs though, where I think they'll look out for the long term. We didn't see him out there on Wednesday. Seems like it'd be a quick ramp up from the spots they're coming from. I think they will. My prediction is that they will err on the side of caution and not overdo it. But you add those things together, and it does concern you. You don't have Josh Downs in the slot. You don't have a kicker that you are trusting, and you may be in a shootout. But I think what will happen is if they don't have Matt Gay for however many games they don't have Matt Gay, that's when I just think we'll see Shane Steichen lean even more to going for it on fourth down, especially with the backfield he has, the numbers he can manipulate. I don't know that they're going to put Spencer Schrader in positions that are kind of stretching him. They're just going to have to adjust, which is kind of becomes Shane Steichen's job. But yeah, you really hope for Matt Gay's sake, for this team's sake, that it's not something that's going to linger, because they paid more money than any teams paid a kicker, because this was such an annoying problem to them 2 years ago that they looked like they had totally fixed the first half of the season last year before some things happened with Matt Gay, and here he is dealing with another injury. So you hope he's able to bounce back soon.
Yeah, I know that the temptation when a kicker misses is like, let's just cut him and move on to the next one. If you cut Matt Gay, I think $9.9 million accelerates onto the cap right now. Because he still has $6 million of prorated signing bonus, 2.4-ish was guaranteed in March, on like March 18th. And then there was another part of his base salary that was already guaranteed. So there's a significant financial investment there. They're gonna probably see that through this season, barring something crazy. Weirdly, they could actually absorb that hit, I think, much to the consternation of everybody involved who's not the Colts. They could absorb that dead money hit on their cap. But yeah, so it's an interesting thing to watch. It could be a bad thing to watch if it comes down to a kick. We don't know what to expect from Spencer Schrader. I know he made 2 kicks in a preseason game. Preseason ain't the regular season. The crowd, all that stuff, it's going to be a lot different. So Colts play the Texans this weekend. The season is finally here. We will be back as soon as we possibly can, with a first impressions podcast, the first one we've had since the draft, I believe. And for the IndyStar, I'm Joel Erickson. This is Nate Atkins with a cameo appearance from Watley Erickson. 2 of them. He showed back up again.
Mm-hmm.